While leaders are convening in Dubai this week with the pressure to address climate risks topping the agenda. Well, CNBC Africa is now joined live by Daouda Sembene, CEO Africa Catalyst, to get a feel of what will be Africa's key priorities out of this year's COP28. Thank you so much, Daouda, for making the time to speak to us. Clearly, a lot on the cards for Africa. And what would a successful COP28 look like for Africa?
Well, Abby, thank you for having me. Joining you from Dubai here. I believe one key expectation from Africa from this COP28 is really it help them sort of put in place what they call a just and fair energy transition, a green transformation that would be inclusive and fair. And I think that's a great expectation from the African group of negotiators here. The fact that Africa has been one of the low emitters and contributing to less than 5% of greenhouse gas emissions make it also less responsible. But at the same time, Africa has shown its readiness and its willingness to contribute to the fight against climate change. But I think one key success would be how the international community would be actually willing to really put on the table the financing that is needed for countries from developing countries, from Africa in particular, to really be able to implement their climate action agenda, those that are identified as part of their nationally determined contribution. I think that would be critical, that's one. And I think a second expectation that would really make this COP very much successful for Africa is for the conference to help respond to the call for more adaptation finance. As you know, there has been a lot of climate finance flows to developing countries, maybe not at the level that was really expected, but I think most of those flows were in the form of mitigation, and Africa has been calling since COP26 and 27 for at least a doubling of adaptation finance. So I think this is also going to be something that we look forward to hearing after the end of this conference, to what extent the international community will be responding to this call from Africa. I think that's important. That being said, I think one thing that also has to be sort of very much welcome is the early win from the UAE during the first days of the conference with the establishment of the loss and damage fund that has been put in place after having been approved during the last COP in Egypt.
Quite a lot indeed, as you've rightly put it out, Daouda. And this loss and damage fund continues to elicit a lot of reactions. How will the leaders present make sure that the funds are allocated, they are distributed in a transparent manner and in an efficient manner, and it finally gets to the countries that need it the most?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. I think since the idea of having the fund was approved during the last COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, I think there's a lot of work has been done by the UN and all the countries that are involved. And so I think the announcement that was made at the beginning of this COP that some funds have been made available to that loss and damage is very much welcome. I think it was announced that about $260 million have been made available by a few rich countries, including the UAE and Germany. So I think that was a very welcome development, and I think it has been already approved how this fund would be distributed to those countries that are vulnerable to climate change. I think the key issue is, if you look at it, of course, it is welcome that we have that fund now, but I think if you look at the magnitude of the amount we are talking about, 260 million, that's of course much welcome, but it's a drop in the ocean of climate finance that is needed for developing countries to be able to adapt and mitigate the effect of climate change. So the idea is now how to make sure that we really increase the scale of this funding, and also identify clear ways, clear sources for funding, for replenishing this fund. I think those are the critical issues that needs to be responded. At this stage, there is no clear answer yet, because I think it was agreed that This fund would be replenished on a voluntary basis by countries that would advance economies and also rich economies. But I think this is not clear enough to really give us some clear sort of reassurances that the fund would be adequately funded so that it can help the developing countries that need it to adapt and mitigate the effect of climate change.
And of course, Daouda, there's a lot in the offing. When you look at the funds that Africa requires, we're looking at around $300 billion every year. And in equal measure, we're also seeing not much activity happening when it comes to climate debt swaps. And this is an area that you recently released a report on. What potential does this portend for Africa?
Yes, I think during the Africa Climate Summit that took place in September in Nairobi, Africa launched a report on how the international community can help scale up the debt for climate and nature swaps. As you know, many African countries are currently facing a high level of debt. And it is important to see, at the same time that we are trying to address the challenge of debt, to see to what extent also it can support climate action. So debt for climate swaps are a very innovative instrument to help actually, address those two challenges. And our report, the one that was issued by Africa Catalyst, gave a number of proposals and recommendations that would help us scale up the use of such swaps, across the continent. It is estimated that the market for debt swaps could achieve more than $800 billion, so which is actually quite colossal and important for developing countries. And as you know, most low-income countries in Africa are currently either in high risk of debt distress or in debt distress. So having them, giving them the opportunity to use those swaps would be very much critical to help them address the debt challenge while also contributing to the need for climate action at the global scale.